It's Tim Alstead here, DragBoss Garage. So we had a little bit of a scare right there, didn't we, Brent?
A little bit.
I'll tell you what happened. There's 21 people here now, Brent, but I had some problems with the internet. So my wife actually said, hey, let's get a better service, a little bit speedier upgrade and download. So they did it today. So when I came in here, we were talking okay, but then I started seeing the signal kind of get weak. And now it's doing it now. So hopefully it's okay and I don't get blurry. But then I said, let's restart the computer. And what happened? It wasn't starting. It wasn't booting up. Now there's like 1 minute come in and it just came on. So it's like my hands are sweaty. It really gets you going. But I want to welcome you, Brent Lykins from Lykins Motorsports to DragBoss Garage for this live chat. Welcome everybody here. I'll give a quick shout out to who's here. We got Brian Lawrence. He's been here for a while. Perry Ford. Ed Case, Dan Haynes, Bill Fioretti. What's up, Bill? Michael Thompson, good to see you. Tom Lewandowski, good to see you. Trunkback Jim, Jim M. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you guys. So if I think you're probably the first engine builder that I've had on here that's currently building engines at this point in time, Brent. So welcome.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate taking the time from your family to be here. And I thank my family, Andrea, Izzy, and Elena for giving me the time to do this. So welcome, guys. So I'll kind of ask you a couple questions to kind of get us into the swing of things. Because in this type, we had talked about this before, Brent and I. And what we talked about was doing more of a question and answer type thing. Kind of go over some of the engines that Brent is familiar with, that he works on a regular basis. So we'll start with that. Now, you're from Simpsonville, Kentucky. That's where your shop is, correct?
That's where the shop is. I was actually born and raised in northeastern Kentucky, right where Kentucky and Ohio and West Virginia meet. So I usually start with Ashland as the city because most people know about where Ashland is, but I'm actually from about 25, 30 minutes west of there. But I moved down here in 2004, had a stint at University of Kentucky, got my degree in mechanical engineering, and worked a few jobs after that, and then eventually made it here.
Nice. Now, mechanical engineering, what aspect were you in? Automotive, design, what kind of stuff?
So the different specialties that we had access to, HVAC, mechanical design, that sort of thing. And I did a lot of, I took some master's classes in like lean manufacturing and that sort of thing. Okay. And then did some design as well. So I do some solid modeling for products that I make, and sell from my business and, have those made. So it comes in handy every now and again.
That's nice. So, but from HVAC, right? Kind of the basis of HVAC to building engines.
Yeah.
That's quite a contrast, I like that. Now, we've known each other, I'm trying to think, probably since around, like 2000, maybe 10, when I remember meeting you on the boards. Do you remember when that was on the Cleveland Forum and stuff?
I'd say that's about right. Yeah, we were on the Network 54, the 351 Cleveland Forum together, it seems like.
Back in the day when we didn't have all this video and ease of media, social media all over the place.
Yep.
We type back and forth. What do you think about this? Or, so, and back then there was a lot of different people talking, you never knew who they really were. And there's always conflicts, whatever you say, everybody's done this better than you, or they have a different way of doing it. And isn't that the truth though? There's 100 ways.
Everybody on the internet has a chip on their shoulder. It seems like it's engine building, any of the things that involve manly things, engine building, shooting, that sort of thing. Our ego has to be part of all of it. So it's easy to get into some spats online.
Oh yeah, it's easy. No doubt about that. Even here on my YouTube channel, there'll be a few people, and I'm not saying they're all Chevy guys because they're not, but I'm trying to, like I said, I told you this yesterday, I'm such a Cleveland and Ford guy that my niche is kind of limited. So I've been a pro stock guy for as long as since 75. And that's really my passion, is pro stock Cleveland's, and all aspects of pro stock. So there's always some guys getting in there and they want to give their opinion. And I understand that. That's how it is. We all give our opinion, but it's how you give your opinion, being respectful. And that's the issue. And I told you, if people start getting nasty, I just eliminate them, because I don't need that. I don't want that environment.
Yeah, same here on my channel. You know, I've got it set to where I can preview the comments before they go live. And I weed out a lot of comments, you know, just people being hateful and nasty, and, you know, so I give them the click.
I see that option, but I don't do it. I want to see what people have to say, you know, and you can time them out if people get rude, but I want to give them that freedom to say what they want, and give them that, you know, adult behavior that you act like a man, you know, you treat others like a man or a woman, if, you know, depending on your sex. But what about, here's what we all think of you as the Cleveland man, that you just build Clevelands, which I know is the farthest from the truth, because I watch your channel, which I'm going to give a shout out to Lykins Motorsports guys. There'll be a link to get to his channel, you know, and that's how we build our content, is by traffic and subscribers back and forth. That way we can have a free, you know, information highway, so to speak. So I'll put that down for you. But I've always known you to build Clevelands. You built the one that's sitting back there that we'll talk about later, that's been sitting for about 5 or 6 years. But I realize now, I watched a video yesterday that you put up, that you do a lot of FE stuff with stock blocks, the BBM, that kind of thing. Give me some experience on what you do and your likes and dislikes for the FE.
Well, first, I haven't said this yet. I just want to give you props on how well your channel is doing. It seemed like just the tail end of last year, you had 6,000 or 7,000 subscribers, and you really pumped it up. So congratulations on that. And you've done a phenomenal job, and I'm sure everybody appreciates that. But I did a lot of Clevelands, and, you know, the reality of it is that I just don't get a lot of orders for Clevelands. I don't know why. The Cleveland's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the Ford engines. And, you know, everybody always wants the Windsors and, you know, the big block stuff. Mm-hmm. But I would love to do more Clevelands, but I just don't get that many. I don't get that many orders for them. I don't have any orders for Clevelands right now. Now, Clevers, I have some orders for.
Sure.
You know, Windsor blocks with Cleveland heads. But, yeah, the 100% Cleveland stuff, I haven't had one come here in quite a while.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm making a video right now, and it's kind of going to be 2 parts. I'll kind of give you the heads up. I worked on today, I'm doing the Cleveland block, just the block, because if you try to do the whole engine, there's just too much information. But actually, it was kind of derived from the Windsor block, or at least the Windsor block was first, you know, the XC 5382, I think it was. But anyways, so I'm doing some history on that. And then I'm going to, once I get the blocks to show people where they came from, because the Windsor was out in 66. It wasn't called the Windsor until there was an issue between Cleveland and Windsor for identification. But it was a Windsor-based type block. You know, they took the 289 and made a 302 base type block and stretched it, you know, to 9450. And so that's kind of the basis of it. Bill Gay was, you know, pivotal in that. So was Bunky Knudsen, but I'm not going to give away my video. But the Cleveland was only made from, production-wise, what, 70 to 73?
That's it.
You know, they really made it from whatever. I'll get to that time period. But that short time. Now, it went to Australia, and they made it to 82. But, you know, we're not in Australia. We're here in the United States. And although it's a badass engine, and we all love it, and that's one of my favorites, it just doesn't have the popularity because the Windsor has that great oiling system. You know, the priority main, Cleveland doesn't have. You know, the heads lack as far as stock stuff goes. Now the aftermarket, I mean, you can make as much power with a big inch Cleveland or a Windsor than you can a Cleveland big inch.
Yeah.
You know, although I can't say that for sure, and I'm not gonna, because it's my channel and I don't want to say that. So don't take that to heart, boys. I'm just giving you generalities. But that's the issue. Not many guys really build Clevelands. There's not a big following where, I mean, there's the Cleveland, you know, Facebook page. There's, you know, the 351.net. There's your web page forum, but it's not a big following like you think it would be. So that's why you don't have a lot of people building the engine.
That's right. I mean, yeah, and the Cleveland stuff. I mean, uh, I've said it before on my channel. I think the Cleveland head was the best head that Ford ever put out. I mean, bar none.
Oh
And
yeah, I agree.
yeah, I mean, take a look at all the other engine manufacturers and families, and find me, a small block cylinder head that flows, 280, 290, 300 CFM out of the box, and
Ain't
you
happening.
know, and NASCAR ran with it for years and years and years and years. The Yates heads, a derivation of the Cleveland head. It's just a very strong engine platform. And I'm very surprised that more people don't mess with it. But like you say, the Windsor stuff is so plentiful, and the
Sure.
costs are not there. So um, I can understand why people kind of shy away from it.
And the aftermarket support for the Windsors and the 302, I mean, it's ungodly. There's so much stuff for it, and the blocks that are out there. You just
Sure.
can't compete. Look at Tim Meyer. He's been trying to work on that DragBoss block for. I'm telling you, I remember with Todd Buttermore, we came up with it back in 2006. About then is when we started doing it.
Yeah.
And then had a stroke and had some issues, and then Tim ended up getting the tooling and the patterns and everything like that. But it's that front engine cover, that extension, that could have came from Bunky Knudsen, and because it's similar to an Oldsmobile 350,
Right.
it has that extension, and that affects the water jackets and stability, I think.
Yeah.
And there's not a big aftermarket draw for it right now.
But the thing is, I mean, some of the strongest small block Fords that I've built have had Cleveland, style heads on them.
Oh, sure.
The 354 that you have behind you belonged to Brian Gilchrist. And before I sold him that engine, I built a
408?
couple or more for him, a 408 and
Yeah.
then a 434
Mhm.
cleaver. And the 434 was a Ford Racing Boss block,
Yes.
9200 deck, and we used some ported CHI 3V heads and a CHI 3V intake, just a single carburetor, 14-to-1 solid roller camshaft vacuum pump, nothing special, and 780 horsepower. So just at 7,000 RPM. I mean, we didn't even have to spin it up high. So I could give examples of that all day long. I did another all aluminum 460 cubic inch cleaver with I think it used an aluminum dart block, the CHI head, CHI intake on pump gas, 730 horsepower. Just a tremendous cylinder head and cylinder head design. You just don't see it, until you get to big block Fords and big block Chevrolets and things like that.
Sure. I remember you and I got not in a tiff, but we got into a debate over, aluminum Cleveland versus cylinder block versus cast iron, and the loss of power between the two. Remember that?
Mhm.
We talked about that for like weeks. It's
Yep.
like we get into it, but it's like beating the oil system with a dead horse, which I know we're going to talk about later, but it's always fun to talk about. But how about this one? Here's a little quick question. Because we said we're going to kind of go back and forth and kind of be laid back. We got over 80 people right now tuned in. So maybe you remember this. And I read the questions so other people can hear what we're talking about if they're listening to in the shop. Jim M. Brent built my 408 Cleveland. Excellent work.
Yeah.
Jim M.
Jim's a good customer. I appreciate him.
Thanks, Jim. We appreciate it. Let's see here. I like this one. Bob Mopar. Hey, Tim. Thank you. I do. There's a lot of Chevy guys on my channel, a lot of Mopar guys, because I love all engines. I don't care what they are or cars. They're all great. I just prefer Ford, and I'm a Ford guy.
Yeah.
But you got to respect them all because they all have their good parts and their bad parts.
If I weren't a Ford guy, I'd be a Pontiac guy, I think.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my number two. I love Pontiac stuff. Yeah.
I wouldn't have taken that. I would have thought you were more of, Mopar or Chevy, but
Yeah, I mean, it's always been my personality to like the stuff that people don't like. You know what I mean? I don't want the stuff that everybody else has, and that goes with, whatever I'm doing, firearms or cars or
Sure.
engines or whatever. And I just like the niche stuff. But Pontiac guys. You don't hear a lot of Pontiac guys, but it's a very strong engine. I've built a few for. I did a 400 dyno mule once for myself, and built a few others for some customers. I mean, a 434 cubic inch Pontiac motor with Kaufman heads and a hydraulic roller, 10-to-1
Yeah.
compression, 600 horsepower. I mean, dual plane intake. I mean, this is just a very strong platform. But I still bleed blue.
I have a buddy that has it's like a 74 Firebird. So it's big. I think it's 468 cubic inch, but he runs those Kaufman heads. I mean, that thing, and they're ported to the point where, they're paper thin, but that car runs like 940s straight on the mufflers, man. It just, his name is Darby Otto, if you're watching. So here's another one. Let's see. Eric McMahon. I've seen videos of this gentleman working on cylinder heads that I've never seen before. Tunnel port heads. Yes. And that brings up a question. Now we know the Boss 30, the Boss 302 platform, they had tunnel port heads. What did FE have them? Let's talk about tunnel port heads.
Yeah, so both the small block Ford, the Windsor base, and the FE had tunnel port heads, and they were pretty similar in design. They're just a big old hole.
Right.
The small block stuff wasn't really successful. They tried it in Trans Am racing, and they put it on a 302, and you take a port this big, and they were having to pull such high RPMs to get power that they were losing the bottom ends of the engine. Sure. So shortly thereafter, the Boss 302 came through, and they started having success with that. But in 1967, Ford started doing the tunnel port FE heads, and they were not available in a production car. You basically either had to buy the top end kit, the cylinder heads, the intake manifold across the counter from a Ford dealer, or you could buy crate tunnel port engines from suppliers like Holman Moody, sure, or Carroll Shelby, or somebody like that. But back in the 60s, they weren't really getting a handle on port velocity versus flow. And it's like everything else of the 60s, they made it as big as they possibly could, and they weren't really seeing what the drawbacks were with those cylinder head designs. So, now we're messing with ports that are much smaller. You look at a 3V CHI head, the ports are very small. And I do the same thing with the tunnel port FE stuff. I've got a tunnel port sitting behind me, and a couple more orders for tunnel ports. What we do is we fill the floors of the port, and fill it with about 5/16 of epoxy, and it shrinks the volume down. And not only does the flow go up, but the port velocity goes up. So you end up with literally a 380 CFM cylinder head, and they make tremendous amount of horsepower, way above all the other stuff that was available for the FE back then. But the drawback is they have the pushrod tube that goes through the intake manifold. So you got this big honking tube that blocks, the intake manifold, the port, and you do lose a little bit of flow to that tube. But man, those engines still make a lot of horsepower.
Yeah, Darren Morgan told me that it was a great idea, but the way it affects the flow coming through there disrupts it. A lot of turbulence. They just don't work well for, unless you're high RPM all the way, not something to drive on the street.
Yeah, so we can do some things with the cams to help with that. And, I do a lot of custom cam work, and, cams are all about cam timing, and, the valve events, your intake opening and closing, your exhaust intake opening and closing. And we can manipulate those to kind of take advantage of, a big port on a small engine or whatever we need to do. So some of that can be tuned out with a camshaft. Same with a Boss 302, big old fat port on a little motor. There's some things that we can do to the camshaft to give some streetability and to make the engine pull hard at lower RPM.
Well, perfect example is the 354 back there. You had someone, I don't know if we I guess we can mention the name. I think it was Straub or something, but someone built a cam for you, designed a cam for that engine, and then you went to lunch, had it cool off, switched the cam, threw yours in. I think picked up like almost 30 horsepower or something.
It did, yeah.
Just with a cam change. So.
And you wouldn't think that, you know, I think guys have just too much of a general view of what cams do. And, you know, you may look at two cams and they be, you know, 5 or 6 degrees off each other, or the lobe separation is 1 or 2 degrees from each other, and think, oh, that's close enough. Mm-hmm. But my goodness, I mean, you can change just one aspect of a cam spec and pick up a tremendous amount of horsepower. I did 2 back-to-back when I started messing around with the Trick Flow FE heads. I started doing cam tests to see what the heads, you know, liked. So I would build multiple iterations of the same engine. So a 445 Trick Flow heads, Performer RPM intake, 10.3 to 1 compression, quick fuel 780 carburetor, and a hydraulic roller cam. And the more that I would split the intake and exhaust duration, the more horsepower I made. So going, you know, getting back to what I just said, the first cam was 231, 235 at 50, so just a 4-degree split. I went from that to a 231, 239 cam, so 8-degree split, picked up 12 horsepower, 15 pound-feet of torque. So, you know, that may not seem like a bunch, but, you know, if you're buying a custom camshaft, would you turn down an extra 15 horsepower? You know, I don't think anybody would. Yeah. So, you know, you go from a 530 horsepower motor to almost a 550 horsepower motor.
Now the question lies here. When I see that kind of duration, we're talking some kind of street engine, you know. So where did it change the RPM band when you went with that split?
Didn't change it at all. So that was part of the test. So, you know, I wanted to change one variable, keep everything else the same. So we kept the overlap the same, the lift was the same. And that first number, that 231 at 50 intake duration, that's what controls, along with how well the heads flow, that's what controls where the engine peaks. So changing the split doesn't really change where the engine peaks, but it allows you to make more horsepower. What you're doing is you're crutching for a poor exhaust port. Okay. And there aren't many Ford engines that have good exhaust ports. So you will find a lot of the camshafts that I grind for Cleveland's and for factory headed Windsors and, you know, big block Fords and FEs have a lot of split to them. And I've proven on the dyno that's where the horsepower comes from.
What are you saying? Are you talking 10, 12 degree split? What's your thoughts on that?
It depends on the head. And, okay. You know, I go by intake and exhaust flow ratios is kind of what I have in the back of my mind when I do this. And an 80% flow ratio is a really good cylinder head. And you'll see that from some of the Pontiac stuff, some of the LS stuff. Most Fords, especially the factory Fords, are anywhere from 60 to 65. Your Trick Flow FE heads are generally high 60s. So, you know, I'll always look at the cylinder head, whichever head I'm looking at, and try to get flow numbers and then base the cam off of the head flow numbers.
Okay. Which is how it should be. You know, that's definitely how you should get the cam, not pick one out of the catalog and say, oh, this looks like it's a good one. You know, unless you're, you know, building something that you're not going all out on, you know, or you want the best performance from. Here's another question for you. Johnny Honda, that's a cool name. First question, is it worth painting the inside of a street engine with the orange paint? The paint, I think he's talking Gliptol. The paint escapes me. Gliptol.
Yeah, so Gliptol was created by General Electric for electric motors, if I remember correctly.
Yep, you're right.
My general rule of thumb is paint does not belong on the inside of an engine. And you can do other things if you're having oil drain back problems, but I would not advise anybody to use any type of paint on the inside of their engine. I've actually seen that stuff flake.
Okay.
And once it starts flaking, it doesn't stop flaking, and then it starts coming off in wads. BBM used to make their FE engine blocks with a black coating on the inside. Yeah. And if I get those blocks in here now they haven't done that in a while, but if I get those blocks in here, I will have them still abraded and take all that paint off there.
Okay.
Because the instant that you start maybe grinding an oil passage or a drain or something, then it starts to chip, and then it's Katie bar the doors. So I don't put any paint on the inside of engine stuff or cylinder heads or anything like that. I've actually seen guys put that Gliptol stuff on the top of the cylinder heads where the valve springs and everything are.
Yes.
And you start putting valve spring locators on, and then the valve springs are beating away, and you can start seeing that stuff flake off. So I just don't use it.
All right, thank you. Perry Ford, Brent sure builds a lot of FEs. Yes, he does. I like this one. 2 Ford Radicals, awesome. Okay. Rick Norrington, for me, the cost per horsepower of the Cleveland versus the 460, but the appearance of the Cleveland, in my opinion, is the best looking engine. Yeah, I got to agree. It's one of the best looking engines out there, in my opinion. That and the Cammer.
I agree too.
You got to put the Hemi up there too.
Yeah, the big block Ford looks like a big block Chevrolet to me. Even the cylinder head layout, and you get those fabricated aluminum sheet metal valve covers, yes. And if the distributor was in the back, you would say, "Oh, that's a big block Chevrolet." But Rick's right. The big block Ford just makes horsepower all day long, every day. And we've got cylinder heads that are flowing 550 CFM. I did a 556 cubic inch pulling truck engine, naturally aspirated, made 1,206 horsepower at 8,500 RPM. So, they just make horsepower, and it's just a good platform.
I got to agree with you. I love those big cubic inch 385s. What's up, Mr. Will? Good to see you here. Brian Cool. Yep. 70 to 74 on the Cleveland, the U.S. I think they actually stopped making the blocks in 72, and they carried them on to 73. But remember, the 74 was when the Mustang 2 came out, right?
Yeah, the gym that it was.
Yeah, I had a 74. It was a great car, a little 4-cylinder. I beat the hell out of that thing. Johnny Honda said the same thing. Gliptol paint. Yep, we just talked about that. Now, I don't know if you've got any experience with this, Brent, but let's pull it up. Johnny Honda, what are your thoughts of the Aussie heads compared to the 4V head with a street dominator? Now, the Aussie heads, he's talking about the 2-barrel, the 2V Aussie head with the quench chamber.
Yeah, the Aussie head. So I'll just start off by saying, and being transparent, I've never used a set of the Aussie heads. Okay. So, but it's more when I see those, I think more of a CHI 3V. You have, a smaller port that actually flows, pretty decently. I've had some cams ground for some Aussie headed motors, and they did quite well. But if I were to pick between those two, I would pick the 4-barrel head with a strip dominator. Yep.
And that's what I'm putting on that 354. People have kind of, they haven't been negative, but the intake you had was stock. I have one that has some work, and I just said, I made it into a square hole pattern, like a Holly, got rid of the spread bore. I'm just going to smooth out the plenum. I think the plenum is terrible on those intakes.
They are.
It is just, it's just bad to me when I look at modern and what it should be. So I'm going to use my own experience that I've learned and I've never ported anything. So I'm going to port it and see what it does. Now, we talked about that motor might not make the same horsepower because it's been sitting for 5 years. And that's true. But if it don't blow up, I'm good, man. I don't care what it makes. It's going to go in my wife's car. I bet you it'll still run 1050s all day long. And that'll be fun.
For sure.
Thank you for building that motor. I appreciate it, Brent.
No problem. Those strip dominator intakes are very nice. So, do you know Jay Brown?
Yes.
Of FE Power.
Yep.
So he came out with an intake adapter for the Ford FE, and he did all these tests, and I actually sent him. Well, I'm trying to remember. No, I did not send him an intake. I sent him a carb adapter to use a Dominator on a strip Dominator intake.
Okay.
And that was, if I remember correctly, the strip Dominator was either the or one of the two highest performing intakes. And that wasn't on a 351 cubic inch engine. That was on a very large FE. So,
Wow.
you know, if they will support big
Right.
displacement, they're going to do well on a smaller engine too.
Nice.
Yeah.
I saw that adapter he made. In fact, the guy that originally made that was Paul Bedouin, Postdoc Paul from back in the 70s. He made that intake adapter first.
Yep.
Michael Thompson. The Cleveland is uncommon because it's outlawed at many roundy round tracks. Anything with canted valve. As soon as you say canted valve head, you know, it's a whole different story, you know. And we all know that, unless some guys don't. Remember, when those valves right here, when they're opening up, they're going in. They're reducing that shrouding. So right there is a huge horsepower difference. And then we talked about this. Is it worth painting? We talked about that. Nope, not worth it. I'll bring this up because tightest performance through the aftermarket. Tightest performance produced aftermarket block based on the Cleveland. Well, they have one. I haven't really seen any. I think I've seen one run, and you know, Mark has built some other stuff, but it's just like Tim. I haven't really seen the proof in the pudding yet. I've seen pictures of them, and I got one. It's at BS right now, waiting to get done. You know, but with waiting for parts, it takes forever. But the star that shines twice as bright burns half as long. That's right. That's a good analogy. Once I do that, my video on the Cleveland, you know, I'm going to do the block first and then the whole origin of it, because there's too much information on where the block came from. So thanks, Bill. Johnny Hahn, my Cleveland is a 1982. Yep. And I have 4V. Yep. This is a street engine, street dominator. What do you think of port plates on the exhaust or port stuffers? Well, I'll tell you, that's a great block. It's the XE block. That's a pillow block. Anytime you're going to have something on the street, really anywhere, you put those port stuffers, it's going to make a difference. Because that head, I mean, look at it right here, right? You can't see it here because I got that name up there, but look at the size of that port. I'll give you a good picture of it. I mean, look at it. It's huge.
It's
so
big.
There's no velocity, and that's what Brent's saying, and that's what we try to. It's not flow. We don't care if it flows 280 or 400. It's how fast that air is going through and carrying that mixture that makes the power. And these heads will benefit from those port stuffers. Darren Morgan told me I think they pick up, I want to say 30 foot-pounds of torque, I think he told me, by stuffing those ports. So yeah, it's a big difference. Now the other one, I'll ask you, Brett. They used to make a thing called the Stinger. It was made by MPG at one time. It was a bronze tongue that went into the port for the exhaust side. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Give us some experience on that.
I don't have any experience with that.
I heard they didn't do much. You know, they didn't help that much. You know, the best thing is the high ported head back here where you cut it off and put the aluminum plate. But I don't know. Maybe other people have ran that Stinger plate.
Yeah, I mean, I've always heard it. I've heard John Causey say it, and I've heard some other porters say it, that the exhaust port isn't as important. The air and whatever's coming out, it will find its way out. It'll do whatever it takes to get out. And from my experience with these factory Ford stuff, the FEs and the Clevelands, the exhaust port really just doesn't seem to matter. I mean, the tunnel port FE head, the exhaust port stinks bad. And, those engines will make, 720, 750 horsepower, without touching the exhaust port. So, one thing that I see there on your cutaway, the short side radius on that 4V head, that's an area where most guys should spend a little bit of work. A little bit of air on that short side radius will get the air hitting right where it's supposed to hit instead of bouncing off the wall. and you can pick up quite a bit of power just from working that short side radius and putting a good valve job. And 4V heads are just good. I mean, they just are, from factory.
Just got to watch that water there. The water's
Yes.
right here. If you start getting too close, you're going to be having a fountain there. But like you said about the exhaust port, it's got pressure. That piston, it's coming out with force. It's like you said, it's not as important. Whereas the only way that air is getting in there is to draw that piston coming down and atmospheric pressure.
Right.
Air weighs 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level. So depending on your height, you think about the weight of air is different. So definitely makes a difference. Super killer. Brent, does the tunnel port idea have any future or just a bad design? No way around it.
Unless it's for the guys who are very nostalgic, I do not see that head having much of a future. And the reason is because the intake manifold. Those tubes going through the ports, not only does it hinder some airflow, but it really it can complicate geometry. So, those engines were designed for flat tappet cams with, little short 2-inch lifters. When you go to a roller lifter and, the lifter gets taller and the push rod seat raises, you can create some geometry issues with the push rod in those tubes. And if you get into that spot, it is a pain in the hind end to fix it because you're having to remove the tube. You're having to make an oval tube. You're moving the tube up in the port. So it just creates a logistics nightmare from that standpoint. And I actually did a tunnel port for a guy, and he brought me the rarest tunnel port intake that was made by Ford. It's a 4-barrel dual plane tunnel port intake, and there's no telling how much this intake was worth. And it just so happened that we put a roller cam in it, and the way that the block had been decked and the way that the heads had been cut, we just had, push rod issues, clearance issues inside the intake manifold. And I just told him, I said, you're bringing me, a $3,000 or $4,000 intake, and I don't feel comfortable cutting this thing up. So I actually delivered a long block to him and said, if you want to cut it up, it's your intake, you can cut on it. So that's what happened with that. But that idea was, 1960s, and I don't see it going anywhere. The FE head in general is just not a very good design. And from what I've seen between the different engine families, it usually takes about 30 cubic inches more on an FE to make the same amount of horsepower as, another engine family. So the FE cylinder head just has a pretty big disadvantage to, as it starts off. Now, Jay Brown's doing his new FE heads, and, he's moved the ports around and did some different valve angles and that sort of thing. That looks pretty promising. And his dyno mule, 510 cubic inches, he's right at 900 horsepower with that thing right now. So I think there's a lot of promise with those cylinder heads.
That's about what Ray Paquette's making in his car. I think he's making 950 horse with that.
Yeah, he's got a high riser, and I don't know if we'd never get him to tell us, but he's hitting some pretty low ETs, and I don't know if it's. I'm sure a lot of it's the engine, but I'm almost sure that the rest of it is how the car is set up and all that stuff.
Big difference.
And as well as anybody else, you drag race, and if you could have 1,000 horsepower engine, if your car is not set up and dialed in, you're not going to do anything with it.
No. Big shout out to Unity Motorsports Garage. What's up, folks? Love Brent's channel and DragBoss Garage. Thank you, Andy. I did like that. What was it? The Bill Jenkins video from the 72 Vega. It's funny. I just found the brand new issue from 1972 showing that car with a big spread.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's got all the guys' cars in there and Dino Don's in there. So I'll have to maybe make a video on that. But he also contributed to DragBoss Garage. Thank you, Andy. And I appreciate that. And the people that contribute with a super chat, and like I tell everybody that's on here, I either it all goes in the DragBoss kitty, and I don't touch it except for the channel, or I offer to split it with you because you take time out of your family and your business. So I have no problem splitting whatever we make here with you to help you build your channel too. So we talk about that later. But yeah, I make it open because that's important to me for people to know. I don't go and buy a pair of shoes with that money. Because I got the same shoes probably from 10 years ago. So no, I don't spend money on shoes. But thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. Let me see if we got a couple more here. Now here, this is a good one. You may have some experience with this, Brent. Dan Haynes, spend the money on a Strip Dominator or Blue Thunder. I've used MPG intake plates for years, no problem. Okay. I know the only Blue Thunder I know that there has that dual plane that's like a copy, and I know that's almost as good as the Strip Dominator or any other. It makes just as much power, And the Scott Cook has one too that's similar. What do you know?
The only Clevelands that I've built with the Blue Thunder intakes were lower RPM, lower performance stuff. 425, 430 horsepower street engines.
Okay.
So I've never really done a comparison between those two, but I'll take your word for it.
Just from what I've read, I've never ran either of them, so I don't know about the Blue Thunder or the Scott Cook one. This is kind of good. Experiment 626. Daily a Chevy, race a Ford, tow with a Dodge. I like that. Johnny Honda again. Dan, okay, I did buy this is to someone else, but Cat engines. I didn't know that Cat engines had port plates in them, but there it is. You learn something new every day. Carly Wolf. We know a lot of Ford guys that also love Pontiacs. I think one of my favorite Pontiac is not just the 66 GTO or 67, but I like the 70, I think it is. It's kind of like a Nova based. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I always love those.
Yeah, they had one that looked like a Chevelle, and that's probably my favorite. And it always escapes me the name of it. I asked Keith Jones this on my interview the other day, and he looked at me like I was had three heads. But Tempest.
Ventura
I think it's a
like
Tempest.
Tempest. Yep.
Yeah. So they had one that looked like a 70 Chevelle, and I always liked that body style in the Chevrolet stuff.
Let me see what we got here. Because a lot of times people are actually talking to themselves on this. There's like different conversations that it's hard to pick out if they're talking to someone else, but it's crazy. There's 138 people here, Brent.
Wow.
That's a good chat for this kind of thing. And you'll see that people start answering their own questions, like they have their own little side comments going on. It's kind of pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's see what this says. Michael Thompson. Maynard Troyer held off the big block Chevys for a long time while with an FE-powered modified Sportsman. Eventually, the good parts ran dry, and that's what happened to him, not lack of speed. That's true, though, with FE. Let's talk about that. For the FE, I know you got trick flow heads. BBM was a big guy as far as aftermarket blocks, but I thought they stopped making them.
They're still making blocks. Robert Pond also makes blocks.
Yeah.
And Carroll Shelby has an aluminum FE block. So there's some out there.
What about heads? What heads are available for FE's aftermarket?
You can still get the Edelbrock stuff, which is kind of like a 428 Cobra Jet head in aluminum with a revised exhaust port. That's about a 260 CFM head. BBM makes a cylinder head. Survival Motorsports, Barry Robotnik has his own cylinder heads. Trick Flow, Blue Thunder used to make some FE heads, and then Jay Brown's coming out with his stuff. Okay.
Now that Trick Flow I watched on your video yesterday, I don't know who does your head work, but I like the way it has that little bit of a ramp in the center of the port, kind of like guide the flow.
Yeah.
What did that head flow? What do those flow stock? And then what did they flow after? I can't remember what you said.
So out of the box, they're about a 330 CFM head.
Okay.
And that's with a 175 cc port. So a fairly small port.
That's
Yep.
small.
Two 190 intake valve and a 1625 exhaust valve. Ported, they do about 360. So we can add about 30 CFM to those heads. And that vane that goes through the intake port is actually, that's how they come out of the box. And you can manipulate that. Yeah, you can manipulate that vane and kind of work on the horsepower a little bit.
I bet you could probably add epoxy to it and shape it or curve it a certain way, you know, to get the short tower a little bit better.
I am not a head porter, and you don't want me within 25 feet of a die grinder. So I'll throw up my hands and say you don't want me talking about how to manipulate heads, but that's just a great head. If you buy those out of the box, they come with pack springs, crane retainers, machine steel valve locks. They have CHE bronze valve guides. I don't know if you're familiar with CHE. They make real high quality valve guides and lifter bore bushings and that sort of thing. So those heads, you pick them up out of the box and they have, great parts with them. But yeah, out of the box, I've made 680 horsepower with those heads on a 465 cubic inch motor.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, they are.
Now, you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but who does your heads? Or is it some local guy around you?
So, yes and no. I used to use Laws Mayfield. And Laws Mayfield, if you follow NASCAR racing, Jeremy Mayfield, Laws is his uncle. And he was down around Owensboro, and he did a whole lot of porting for me for the longest time. And some of my hardest running engines were with Laws Mayfield's heads. He got up in age and had to have some knee replacements and that sort of thing. And then he just kind of, he had a race car of his own, and he just wanted time to do his own thing. So Joe Crane is another one that I've used for a long time. Joe started porting some trick flow twisted wedge race heads for me. Oh goodness, probably 16, 17 years ago. So Joe Crane is an excellent head porter, and he's always trying different things. And if you look at those, if you guys that are watching, go back to the video that I did yesterday of the trick flow head assembly for the Ford FE, you'll notice the intake ports have they don't have a smooth finish in them. So the exhaust ports are as smooth as butter, but on the intake side, it's very rough. And, there's been dyno tests and head tests and that sort of thing shown that when you want the air fuel charge to come in, it's almost better sometimes if it doesn't hug the material of the head, kind of like a golf ball. Golf balls fly so well because they're dimpled, right? So sometimes you get really good performance with the old adage, port and polish. We port, we don't polish anymore. So all your CNC machined heads, they have I wouldn't say a machined finish, but if you look down in the port, they have little ridges and everything in them. You can feel it with your fingers.
Yep.
And they do exceptionally well, out of the box. But Joe's been trying some new things. He has officially retired, and he will knock out some things for me personally, but I don't think he's wanting to take on any public work. So I don't mention him out of, privacy for him. I don't want people blowing up his email or whatever,
Sure.
He's excellent. He's a good guy.
Tom Copa just purchased an FE solid roller from Brent this morning. Would like more info on the street lobe design. Can you expound on that?
On your cam, Tom, we used, since this is going to be driven a little bit on the street, every camshaft, no matter whether it's a hydraulic flat tappet, solid flat tappet, hydraulic roller, solid roller, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lobes to choose from. and you can vary how aggressive the cam is based on which lobes that you use. Some lobes jerk the valve open and hold the valve open for a long period of time and then slam her shut at the end. Some are a lot easier on the valve train. So as you can imagine, on the all-out race stuff, it's the ones that we're jerking the valves open, holding them on, holding them open for a long period of time, and then slamming them shut. On a street motor, that's hard on valve springs. That's noise. A lot of guys don't like noisy cams. We generally use the term, this cam is a spring eater. You'll make 20 passes on it and, you'll see your spring pressure going away. So the cam that I used for your engine, Tom, is a what I call a street roller lobe. It is not the laziest lobe, but it is not the most aggressive lobe either. It's kind of like middle of the road in terms of what you need in regards to spring loads to control it, how long those springs will last. We're looking for longevity, that sort of thing. So we hit the middle of the road with your cam, but it'll make good horsepower, I promise.
What do you think about, what's your opinion on, a hydraulic roller versus a solid roller for the street,
For the street, I am 99.9% a hydraulic roller guy. Okay. And the reason is that solid roller lifters have a shelf life, and they don't last for forever. So you have a combination of lash and which could be anything from 10,000 slash to 30,000 slash on some of the cams that I've seen. So you have a combination of that gap and spring load. So over time, those needle bearings in that roller are getting smacked and they're getting hammered. Mm-hmm. If you remember from 25 years ago, solid roller lifters on the street were lasting about 2,500 miles. And then they would beat the rollers out and then spit needle bearings all over your engine. Then pressure-fed oiling lifters came out. Comp Cams came out with their Endurex lifter. Crowler had their Hippo lifter. Pressure-fed lifters. That's the majority of lifters today. They're all pressure-fed. That made the lifter last probably 3 or 4 times longer. So guys were getting 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 miles out of their lifters. And then companies like Morel and Iski and BAM and, those guys started coming out with bushed lifters. So instead of needle bearings in the roller, you have either a bronze or a steel bushing. And we're seeing 25,000 miles, something like that out of those. But that's about it. That's all you're going to get. So I guess you could say, how long do you plan on driving your car? Guys that have toys, drive them on the weekend. If you're not going to put 5,000 miles on your car in 5 years, then you could probably run whatever you want to run. If it's a daily driver or you're planning on, keeping it up for the long haul, hydraulic roller is, absolutely the best way to go.
I got to say, I just like solid rollers. That's it. I don't drive my car enough, and with that kind of duration, it sounds mean as hell and it goes 960s, but in the street, it's dog probably. I mean, where are you going to go anywhere? Even with a street car, where are you going to drive, and shift at 65 or $7,000? Not a lot of places do that, No. If you want a street car, you want that cam in the 225, 238 range, that's when you're going to feel it. Bill Fioretti, don't forget the thumbs up, guys. Yes, thank you. Please give us thumbs up, like, and share. That's how we build our channels. That's how we bring you content you've never seen before. And in my case, bringing guests that you just don't get to talk to much on a personal basis and ask the questions that you want to. So thank you so much for that.
I think I'll always be at a loss on subscribers just because of the niche that I'm in. There's not a lot of guys running. Well, I mean, there's a lot of guys running FE stuff, but relatively speaking, the amount of guys, running FEs compared to Windsors and that sort of thing. I've kind of whittled myself down to a little chunk of the internet, and it's taken me quite a while to get to where I am right now. And I do notice that if I do a video with a Windsor or whatever, the views go sky high. But we go back to FEs and it's like 1,000 views, 2,000 views.
Well, that's why I said, my channel was originally just for me to do my car and my racing activities. And then I really wanted it to be a video diary for my kids. So when I'm dead and gone, they can look back and say, hey, there's Dad working in the garage, or there's us working on stuff. If you watch that video with a 354, I had my daughter taking the oil pan off, doing that kind of stuff. My 7-year-olds helped me tear apart the C4 transmission. That's stuff I'm trying to teach them. But I know I'm not going to go anywhere if I want to keep this channel going. That's why I focus just on pro stock. That's what I've always loved. Cleveland pro stock. Mopar had Joe Pappas on that gave a great talk on the Mopar missile and all the pro stock beginnings from Chrysler. So that's what I want to focus on, is that pro stock type stuff in my own little activities. That's my niche. So, with you, I don't know if you really want to do other stuff other than engine building. You know what I mean? I don't know what kind of activities do you do other than just build engines? What's your hobbies? That brings up
cars and guns.
Okay. All right.
But I do the YouTube stuff just so guys can watch their engines be put together. I thought that would be a neat feature for, random customers to say, hey, that's my engine right there that he's, tightening the, intake bolts on or whatever. And I thought that would be a good thing to show people. Plus, it helps me. I'm completely OCD when putting engines together. So keeping a video record of, did I torque that rod bolt?
Yeah, I've thought that before. I got to check that. Cam bolt. Did I check that? I've done that. Gone back and went through I think I went through the fuel pump eccentric or the fuel pump hole in the block to get up there with a wrench to make sure it was tight, because I can't remember sometimes. So yeah,
that's a horrible feeling too. But I like shooting. Bench rest rifle and handgun. I used to do, before my daughter was born, I used to shoot some USPSA, practical shooting matches and that sort of thing. So, that's pretty much it. I've got a young daughter, so I try to stay here as much as I possibly can, and try to get her involved with some engine building stuff and helping me in the garage. When I'm measuring for push rod lengths, I let her record all the numbers and, get her running speed handles and putting spark plugs in and that sort of thing. So it's good for them to learn righty tighty, lefty loosey, and, learn what does what. So.
How old is she?
She's 10.
Okay. I have 11-year-olds. So, I know just what you're talking about. This might be a question for you. I don't know about this. How much weight difference between a Windsor and a 460?
I don't know. I mean, obviously it would depend on, cast iron heads or aluminum heads or what, but I would say, I don't know, the 460 blocks are chunks, man. I mean, trying to move those things around, I would say in a cast iron 460 head, it's like 75, 80 pounds. I would say at least 150 pounds, difference between those two engines. I did a cast iron big block Chevrolet for a buddy one time, and I'm 5'6", about 140 pounds soaking wet. So you see me picking an 80-pound head up off the floor. It's an ordeal.
I think a Windsor probably weighs about 550, maybe 570. So add, whatever, 670. You're probably talking close to 700, 680 for a 460, I bet.
I'd say so. They're chunks.
Tom Copa, is a billet crank spacer for FE better than a factory one?
If your factory one is grooved from the seal riding on it, then you're going to have a new crank spacer. But the material isn't, it's kind of not apropos to anything. I would say if your factory spacer is, you can't feel the groove with your fingernail, use it. If you can, run a billet steel spacer. They're cheap.
This is a good question. I'd say no, right off the bat. Johnny Honda, isn't a strip dominator too aggressive for a street engine?
No.
No, there it is. Bill Fioretti built many flat tappet engines in the 70s and 80s without issues. Later, everything began going flat. So I have cams and lifters cryoed and no issues. Brent, opinion between cryogenics and nitride.
All right. So I have only cryogenically treated factory rocker arms for a rules road race engine that had to use factory rocker arms. So I had those stress relieved and cryogenically treated. So that's the only time I've ever done anything like that. Nitride and cams I do on a fairly regular basis with flat tappets. I usually have a spring load in mind when I do that. So when I start getting above 140 or 150 on the seat and say 350, 360 on open spring loads, I'll go ahead and have the cams nitrided. The lifters and the cams going flat recently in the past, 10 or 12 years, guys wanted to blame that on poor metallurgy and oils and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I know that zinc was taken out of a lot of oils, which is needed for flat tappet cam operation. And just like anything else, you get some bad parts from time to time. But in my opinion, a lot of the flat tappet failures that we see are because guys don't watch their spring pressures. And if you look in the catalogs for new heads from AFR, Trick Flow, Edelbrock, whatever, they usually have a hydraulic roller spring and they usually have a flat tappet spring. The flat tappet springs that are available, most guys don't want to take the time to measure the spring loads on the heads, nor do they want to take the time to remove the inner springs out of those dual spring packages. Okay. So you're trying to break in a cam with 130 or 140 pounds of seat and probably, 320 open or something like that. That's just a big no-no. And you'll turn a lifter into a lathe really quick, if you try to do that. So my rule of thumb on flat tappet stuff, no more than 100-pound seat, no more than 280 open spring loads. Whatever lifter that I'm using, whether it's a hydraulic lifter or a solid flat tappet lifter, I try to use the Crower lifters. So on their hydraulic flat tappet lifters, they have a flat that's ground into the lifter, which allows oil to kind of pee on the cam lobe. Yep. Their solid lifters have an EDM hole on the bottom of them. It's like a 12 or 15 thousandths hole, and it's pressurized. So whatever oil is coming through your lifter bore galleries is getting forced onto the cam lobe. So lower spring pressure on break-in, use the good lifters. Good break-in oil is very necessary. And try as hard as you can to get that engine to fire on the first lick. So make sure the carb is right. Make sure your distributor is stabbed in with the amount of advance in it that you need. And, if you're having to crank and it doesn't want to start, just stop and figure out what's going on. But I've never had a cam go flat. So, but I'm really particular about spring loads and that sort of thing. So hope that helps.
Thanks, Bill, for the question. I got to give this big shout out here to my wife. DragBoss family says hi. Hi, Andrea. Hi, Izzy and Elena. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. In your experience, Brett, what lifters do you kind of gravitate to? What do you use? Are you talking Crower? Are you going with BAM, REL? What do you like to use?
On flat tappet stuff, I predominantly use Crower, okay. Which was a big ordeal the past couple of years because all the COVID stuff, they were out of lifters for the better part of a year. On hydraulic rollers, I will predominantly use Morel. If it's a Windsor, sometimes I'll use the OEM style, the Ford Racing lifters with the lifter spider and the dog bones.
Yeah.
You know, the OEM style. Solid roller stuff, I will either use Morel or BAM.
Got it. Okay. Who has the bushings? I know Iski has them. Does BAM have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Iski, Morel, and BAM, all three have the bushings. And BAM has either a bronze bushing or a steel bushing.
What's the advantage?
Um,
Steel.
Longevity and,
Okay.
you know, hardness. Yeah.
Robert Clymer. Good evening, DragBoss and Brent. Blessings from Michigan. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Robert. Racer D. What's up? Brent, have you ever ran the CHI 208 heads?
Oh, yeah. Best head out there for the Cleveland, in my opinion. Love them. And out of the box, 600 horsepower, no problem. You can port those heads to literally 380 CFM.
Wow.
You leave the port opening the exact same dimension, and you work down on the inside of that runner. Big flow. We usually run like a 250 intake valve on some of the big bore blocks that we use. And man, those heads just do so well. CHI, I love those guys. The only bad thing is you have to wait so long for them. I've had heads on order from CHI since I think the spring of last year. But once you get them, they're strong performers.
Wow. Now, what do they have? Is there a 225?
There is, and they've also got a 240 and some CNC ported, I think, that go around 260 cc's, something like that. They also have a 4-barrel head that does really well. So if you want to use a factory 4-barrel intake, that would be the head to pick. If you're using their 3V heads, then you have to use their special intake to go with that. And they also have a 2V head. I'm sorry?
Those intakes are raised.
Yes.
The 3V are raised compared to like the 4V head.
Yeah,
right?
It's a proprietary design. I've even done some engines with their 2-barrel. They've got a 2V head as well, and they do really well.
Thanks, Racer D. We'll be talking to you. So right now we got 173 people out here. That's a good live chat. Very good. Thanks, guys, for being here. It's fun to talk and answer questions, and it's just like bench racing, really. You know, no pressure. We're all having a good time, it looks like. Julian S. Hi, Brent. Any dyno experience with 1 3/4 versus 1 7/8, 4-1 on 550, 600 street-driven 393 408 Clevelands?
I have never done a back-to-back. So the dyno that I've been using, I've used since around 2007, 2008. I use a shop down in Buffalo, Kentucky, Delmir's Racing Engines. He's a good buddy of mine. He builds some really high-end pulling truck and circle track engines, along with some super stock NHRA stuff. Just a very sharp cat. He's got a Stuska dyno, and the way that dyno cart is made, you can't really just swap headers very easily. There's a couple of pedestals that kind of get in the way. So all the headers that I use down there have been custom made, and they come out from the head, I don't know, about 5 or 6 inches before they turn down. So it makes it difficult to just do header swaps and try different things. So I haven't done that comparison. But all the engines that I've dynoed down there with Cleveland style heads have been 1 3/4 tube diameter. So I've made almost 800 horsepower with an 1 3/4 tube diameter.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can tell you my 408 Cleveland made 752 with the 1 7/8 headers.
Yeah.
And that pretty much the same motor, 409 cubic inches, just because the board had to go a little bit bigger. It picked up almost 25 horsepower going to 2-inch headers from 1 7/8.
Yep.
So there's power there when you got the RPMs up there and you got an engine built for 700 horse. You know,
For
I don't
sure.
know about, I don't know, the regular Hooker header 6210 is a 1 7/8 header, I think, and they street header. So I think that'd be fine on there.
Mm-hmm.
Ran them on the street lots of times.
Yep.
What's this one here? Dan Haynes. But as Tim said, flow velocity did increase, prove on a flow bench 20 years ago. Okay. That's what we're talking about. It's velocity, not just airflow numbers.
That's right.
Bill Ferretti, hey to Mrs. DragBoss and the Bossettes. That's what they call my little kids. My little Elena and Izzy, the Bossettes. I like that. Teach us. Right. And, you know, that's one of the things that we talk about here. This is my channel and like yours, it's to educate people. It's to show them stuff they don't see. Not many guys work on FE heads and put them together and assemble them and show you how to measure spring pressures and show you how things work. I never even knew that FE head had an oiling area for the rocker arm that you put an insert in to limit the flow, right? Like a little restrictor with an Allen plug.
Yeah, so
Correct?
FE heads, by the way that they were designed, oil your rocker arms through the rocker arm shaft. And it does it through that little passage that comes up through the cylinder head. I choose, for the most part, to oil through the push rods. So you can't oil through both or you will completely flood everything. And so when I oil through the push rods, I tap that hole and just use a set screw, a blind set screw, and screw that in there and cut the oil off.
So it doesn't, I thought it may have had like a small, 2000s hole through it, but it's not. It just blocks the oil off completely.
Completely blocked off. Yep.
Okay.
And I screw it in there. I tap the hole and screw it in just in the event that, somebody wants to change it later on and they have to oil through the head. They can just remove that set screw. And if I do oil through the head and not through the push rod, then I'll use, depending on the engine, anywhere from, a 60 thousandths to an 80 thousandths hole in that set screw.
Okay. Who told you that, to limit the oil there? Where did you come up with that?
I don't know. You know how some stuff gets passed down,
Yep. Just like this. Let's see. Hi, Tim. Another great show and information. Thanks, Gary. We appreciate that. Just like you're saying, it gets passed down. People say, hey, you know what? I did this. It works. And it just moves down. And that's what we're trying to do, is keep this information highway open. Tom Levedensky. I picked up 35 CFM with just short turn work on the 4V head. And that's a fact, man. Just remember the water's there. So keep in mind for that.
Tom's another good customer of mine. I set him up with a pair of CHI heads last year. He runs my cam, where he did used to run one of my cams. He had a 408 that he would drive back and forth to the track, and he ran one of my solid flat tappets. And I picked him up quite a bit of horsepower from the previous cam, but he's going on to another engine package now. So curious to see how it turns out.
Keep us posted, Tom, on that. Dan Haynes, did you Cleveland guys know the intake port is copied from the 390 GT head? Brent confirm. No,
I hope not, because that 390 GT head was a punk.
Actually, the head Cleveland 4V head came from the Boss 302, from that right before that, 68, I think. So it didn't come from the Ford 390 head. And in fact, when I do that part of the Cleveland video, you'll see where it came from.
I'm looking to see if I've got any 4-barrel Cleveland intake gaskets hanging in front of me. I'd put a FE low riser gasket up against it and show you guys, but I don't think I have one in quick reach.
And
it's
I do have there's a video I just looked at today. It's on my channel with Reverend Cleveland. He goes by. That's Chad Decatur. Now he had a set of the first Cleveland 4-barrel heads. And actually, they came from Smokey Yunick. Bunky Knudsen, when back in '68, when he started with Ford, he kind of brought Smokey in to do some Cleveland work or some Indy work, and they developed that head from the Boss 302 platform, and that's kind of where it came from. So there's a picture of those heads on that video, and my buddy Steve owns those heads now. They made 2 of them. I forgot the number of them now, SK2290, I think. But anyways, Dan, I don't know where you got that information, but comment on it and tell us where you got it. Jim M. Brent, how much work is it to run Jessel rockers on a set of CHI heads? Was thinking of switching mine from the Harlan Sharp I'm currently using with hydraulic roller lifters.
Let me see. I don't think I have ever ran the Jessel on CHI. I have ran T&D on CHI, and it's not any hard work at all. They have a subplate that bolts to your rocker stud holes, and then you have just individual rocker arms that bolt on in the correct locations. It's not any big deal at all. Your push rod length may change, but that's about it.
What's going to change is your pocketbook. You know, to run any of those heads, you know, that's a $2,500 set of rocker arms. Easy.
Yeah.
Now, not that I sell stuff, but I go by experience. And I'll tell you, I used to run, you know, the Harlan Sharp rockers and the crane and all that business. Once I went to Yellow Terra, I never looked back. They're good to 900 and something open spring pressures. You know, I go through the traps, 8,200, never have a bit of problem. Same rocker arms, I think, for probably close to 20 years. And I forgot the price of them, but they were probably about $900, $1,000 now. And they're easy to put on, but that's my experience with it.
So Yellow Terra makes 2 different styles of rockers for the Cleveland.
Right.
They make kind of like a Jessel or T&D style rocker, and then they make a pedestal style rocker. Those rockers do really well too, and they'll hold up to quite a bit of spring loads, but they require drilling a hole in the head, and you may not want to do that on an assembled engine. But Yellow Terra stuff, I mean, comes from Australia, where the guys really work those Cleveland motors over, so they have a lot of experience with Cleveland stuff.
Yeah, the Platinum. I think they're called the higher end of the Platinum rockers.
Right.
That's what I run. Charger RT 1969. So he's not a Ford guy. What about extrude honing and intake manifold?
So extrude honing is only used when you can't get to everything in the runner. And when I think of extrude honing, I'm thinking of a factory
fuel injection
5.0 Ford upper intake manifold. And pretty much any other intake you can either get to it with a long burr on a die grinder or whatever. But some of those are pretty tricky, and then extrude honing is just taking an abrasive material and just shoving it through, kind of like a Play-Doh Fun Factory, toy. Yeah. And it kind of smooths and works its way through whatever you're shoving it through.
Yeah, it was big back in the 5.0 days. That's where I
was.
Luma Masushi. Restrict or not restrict oil on Dart SHP blocks, and is the standard pump better than high volume pumps?
All right, so the SHP blocks, let me think real quick. The Iron Eagle blocks, you can oil from either end. I do not believe that the SHP blocks will do that, but on the Iron Eagle blocks, you need to block off the opposite end that your oil pump is on. On the SHP stuff, I only restrict on solid cam stuff. Hydraulic rollers and hydraulic cams and that sort of thing, they need all the oil that they can get because they function off of hydraulic pressure. And solid stuff, I will usually restrict down pretty far. In 80 thousandths orifice going to each lifter bank is plenty enough to lubricate your lifters and your push rods and your rocker arms. So depending on the application, I would restrict, like I said, unless it's a hydraulic cam or something like that. So people will probably strangle me over oil pump stuff. Okay. The oil pump stuff has started more fights
Oh my God.
than anything else. So I will give my opinion and you can take it for what it's worth, but, I run a lot of high volume pumps, but I also run a lot of standard volume with higher pressure. So in the FE world, I like the B pump. A B pump is a standard volume with a little bit more oil pressure. On small block stuff, Windsors, I run the M68A pump, which is standard volume, higher pressure. On the Cleveland stuff, I will run the AHV pump. Okay. I will say this. I'm speaking in generalities because each engine build and each application is different. But oil pumps suck horsepower. And the more volume that you're pushing through, the more horsepower you're going to suck. So the difference between like a standard volume pump and a high volume pump can be 7-8 horsepower. So you kind of have to weigh what you're doing, what you're feeding, how many RPMs you're turning, if you're trying to get every last horsepower out, if you don't care, that sort of thing. And that's probably not a very good answer, but I would say it just depends on each application. I use them all.
When I see that question, to me he's working with a Windsor-based block, right? Dark SHP.
Dark block.
Cleveland, on the other hand, I mean, I've always run high volume pumps. That's just how I learned. That's how I've always ran. I never had any issues with a 9-quart pan. I never had no oil issues. You know, the biggest problem is you need a big sump. Can't run it good with a 6-quart pan. It just doesn't work.
True.
You know, everyone says, oh no, you don't need high volume. And that's just like you said, there's been a lot of fights on the boards over that. So I always say this, do what works for you.
Yeah.
You know, try one way and try it the other way. There's no right or wrong, you know, it's what works for you. And that's how I look at it. To me,
and it varies from application to application. Yeah.
I mean, you think about your main clearances, that makes a big difference. You know, I always had loose clearances, 35, 38 with stuff. So I had a high volume pump. Now this last motor has, I think that it's 28.
Mm-hmm.
Still has a high volume though, because that's just how I am.
Sure.
But there's a million ways to skin a cat. So
I will say though that, looking back in the 60s, everybody was aiming for as much oil pressure as they could run. They're blowing oil filters off and, I got to have 120 pounds of oil pressure or I'm going to, kill the engine or whatever.
Yeah.
The current trend is kind of less is better. And you'll see probably that little 354 back there, if I can find the dyno sheets, it was probably 60 pounds of oil pressure. And but Cleveland's measured at the back. So by the time you go from front to back, you're going to lose about 15 pounds of oil pressure. So, it's probably closer to 70, but you just don't need, a tremendous amount of oil pressure. And that little motor turned $8,000 and it liked it. And, when I pulled the bearing caps off of it, it's like, oh, I can't remember. These bearings look brand spanking new. When you can see your mic tracks on the bearings after you've been turning 8,000 RPM, you're doing something right.
Well, the other thing that you got to remember too about that block, it's got lifter bore bushings.
Yes.
See, and I've never ran them before, just because I was too cheap and I just never did it. Whatever I had worked. I never had any issues. I just seemed to be lucky, I guess. But that makes a big difference. It's just a system of leaks. It's getting those leaks controlled. So,
well, on a Cleveland, the lifter bores share the oil going to your bearings. So, if you don't control where that's going, now on a hydraulic cam, you don't see much issue there. But if you have a solid cam and you're pumping a tremendous amount of oil to your solid lifters, the instant that push rod comes up off that seat, you got a hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So lifter bore bushings, that's another one of those arguments where you can have a knockout drag out. But like you say, lots of guys have a different luck or success or with their own way. So I'm not going to tell you have to run them. I'm not going to tell you you don't have to run them, but it just depends on the engine.
I used the Moroso oil restrictor kit.
Yep.
For it. I've never ran that front to rear line, but on this engine I put it on, and I dynoed that thing, 23 passes on that thing, pulls, never had a bit of problem. Does that line make much of a difference? I don't know. I never ran it before, so I don't know.
Yeah, I never have either.
Ramon Tubbs. Hey, Tim and Brent, what do you think about the Trick Flow Specialty Cleveland heads? I don't know much about them.
I have only flowed the Trick Flow heads. I've never used those on an engine. And so I love Trick Flow products. I use a ton of their FE stuff. I use a ton of their Twist a Wedge race heads for the Windsor. But the heads that I got on the flow bench did not flow what they were advertised to flow, and it was off considerably. So that kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of work with CHI heads, and their flow charts on their website, I could put them on the flow bench, and they were right there with them. So don't take that as Trick Flow Cleveland heads are bad. I'm sure that they do quite well, but like I said, that kind of put a sour taste in my mouth that I never quite got over.
Arthur, thank you. We appreciate it. Appreciate the $10. Like we said, it goes in the DragBoss Garage Fund. Carly Wolf, thank you. We appreciate that. Glad you guys are here. Very good. Thank you. Try to catch up with all the questions. I mean, when I look at it, 166 people. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half. Brent says to me, goes, Tim, like, how long do these last? What do you think? I said, well, it's hard to say. I've seen them last 3.5 hours. I've seen them last 20 minutes. But I between you and me, not that these guys are listening, Brent, but usually about 2 hours. After that, I think it's about fair for both of us. I try to limit it that because people get tired of being on here, first of all. And I don't, it's not that I don't want to do your questions, but there's so many on here. I just can't keep up with them. So I try to cover everybody. So we'll keep going, maybe about another half hour. Brent will give me the high sign. He'll say, let's go. We'll be done with it. But thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate it. Jim M. Nope, we talked that. Sorry, guys. We've already got that. So the problem is I don't have my glass. It's hard for me to read the screen. I tried making the font bigger, but when I had to restart the computer before this, I got back to the same size. So let me see if I can get something we got here. Yeah, Brent, what do you think of the Comp Cam Street Roller Extreme Energy lobes around 248, 254 duration for a 393 11.5-1 4V?
Street roller. So when I see street roller, I'm assuming that this is a solid roller cam. Those lobes in and of themselves are excellent lobes, and I use a lot of them. Tom, that was asking the question this morning, those happen to be the lobes that I chose for his cam. The only thing I can say about the shelf cams, that 248, 254, is that is a universal camshaft. So if you go and look through a Comp Cam's catalog, they have that same camshaft for Windsor, FE, small block Chevy, big block Chevy, Mopar, everything. That is what we call a universal cam, and they just grind it for whatever core that they're using for whatever engine family. So you have a universal cam, you're going to get universal results. Okay. So I don't know of any Ford heads that just want a 6-degree split. And that's what I would say about that particular camshaft. If you're using it on a factory 4-barrel Cleveland head, I'd split that considerably.
Okay.
Sometimes you get into some of the aftermarket stuff that have a really, really good exhaust port, and you can choke that down a little bit. But the lobes in and of themselves are good. The camshaft as a whole, I think I would, opt for something better.
Yeah, you need more. I mean, you need like 10, 11, 12
Yeah.
split with those heads. That's just my opinion.
And that's not a dig on comp cams. Trust me.
No.
I sold probably 200 custom cams last year, and comp cams ground the majority of them. I don't know of any other manufacturer that has the extensive lobe catalog that they have. They literally have hundreds of pages of stuff to pick from, and all CNC cam grinders. And then once they grind the cam, they put it on an ag cold machine and check it. I mean, just top notch stuff. So don't take that as a dig to comp cams, because it's not meant to be a dig to them. It's just, they're putting out universal stuff, because not everybody wants to wait on custom cams. And obviously comp cams makes more money when they have stuff sitting on the shelf. So, take it for what it's worth.
Thanks, Brent. Rick Norrington, what's your opinion on the gapless rings versus proper file fit ones? Are the gapless worth the money?
So you still have to file fit gapless rings. That's the point of gapless rings is they don't just jam in the bore without a gap. They actually have gaps, but they're clocked so that whatever's coming in from the top of the piston can't get to those gaps. It depends on what you're doing with it. If you're running a class, say a pulling truck class or similar, where they give you a vacuum rule, say they have to measure so much vacuum, manifold engine vacuum, in a specific RPM or something. Gapless rings can sometimes give you a little bit more vacuum. On aluminum blocks, sometimes we run gapless rings just because aluminum blocks tend to, flex and expand and go in different directions, and the gapless rings help keep the ring seal up. So if they're, it just depends on the application whether they're worth the money or not.
What about these thin rings? Now I had, what is it? The 0.7 millimeter. You know what I'm talking about? This new stuff that's coming out,
Yep.
Used to be 1/16 was back in the 60s, and you can see how thin they've gotten for the friction aspect of it. What do you think of those rings? 0.7 stuff.
I haven't used anything that thin. That's on the kind of the braking technology side. So in the interview with Keith Jones from Total Seal,
yeah,
he was saying that we were getting into the 0.5, the 0.7 millimeter rings. All of my experience has been with 1.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter rings. So a tremendous difference in friction and ring seal with the thinner stuff. And, like you say, the older 16th inch rings and the 5/64 rings, when you put an engine together with an old set of Keith Black pistons and you're having to use the 5/64 rings and you're cranking that engine over, I mean, it feels like you're pulling through molasses. The thin stuff, I can literally put a short block together with the cam and the timing set, and I've got a torque wrench that you can check drag on, like a pinion bearing. You know what I mean? When you're setting up your rear end gears, and you can pull on that, and it's literally 8 pound-feet of torque to turn the entire rotating assembly over with a 1 millimeter ring pack. Wow. So better ring seal, less friction. I think there is a point of diminishing returns. So I think the 0.5 and the 0.7 millimeter guys are probably paying a lot of money for that extra 1 or 2 horsepower. But as an overall, the metric ring packs, the thin stuff is a blessing. Sure is.
on that topic, what about cam bearings? 55 millimeter roller cam bearings. Do you use a lot of that, or what's your experience with those?
No, roller cam bearings used to be kind of the thing, but as technology advanced and the aftermarket started filling the gaps, um, the the bigger Babbitt bearings started becoming more and more popular. So, like on my higher end pulling truck stuff, I will use either a 60 millimeter or 65 millimeter Babbitt bearing.
Okay.
And the thing that I see the most with cam bearings is that you need to check the clearances like you would a main or a rod bearing. And it becomes more and more important as the spring loads go up. But I set my cam bearing clearances like I do my main and rod bearings. And, I'll mic the cam.
Sure.
I'll take a bore mic and check my clearance on my cam bearings. And I'm looking for, that 1 thou of clearance per inch of journal. And that's one thing that I have learned over the years with the higher end engines with, 1,200 pounds of spring load or something like that. You will absolutely see a difference when the clearances are set up correctly. The cam bearings don't wear, and everything lives happily ever after together.
What about lifter size? With Ford being 0.875, moving up to something like a 904. Do you find
I do that quite a bit?
Do you?
Yeah. Okay. The cam has to be spec'd with that in mind because It does change things. But you put yourself at an advantage when you use a bigger lifter body diameter, because usually that lifter wheel, the roller wheel, gets bigger as well. And something bigger is going to take a bigger load better than something smaller.
Right.
So 903, 938, 1-inch stuff is kind of where it goes for really high end race motors.
Thank you, Brent. Samuel Freeman, do you know what the minimum bore is needed for Jay Brown's new cylinder head?
So Jay is assembling a couple of dyno mules right now. One is a 445 based off of a factory 390 block. So a 408 bore size with a 4 1/4 stroke crank. And Jay tells me that the heads fit fine with a factory block. Now, obviously, the bigger the bore, the probably the better results you're going to get. The set of heads that I have here flow, I think, about 430 or 40 CFM. And as the bore size on the flow bench got bigger, the flow got better too. So, it really liked a 4.310 or 4.350 bore.
Thank you. Racer D, who or what do you think is responsible for the resurgence of the Ford Cleveland engine?
NASCAR.
NASCAR?
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to figure out the resurgence. I mean, the heads, but, I guess I don't see the Cleveland being resurged yet.
Well, the way that I took that question was, is popular in, 1970, 1971. And then there was that spot where, you didn't see Cleveland stuff.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden the Yates stuff started coming out, and, Cup engines started running Cleveland heads. And then we started seeing aftermarket, CHI, Trick Flow, Edelbrock, that sort of thing come out. AFD.
And DragBoss Garage.
And DragBoss Garage.
There it is, Dave. Now, I saw this. It's pretty interesting. Dan Haynes. Brent, how long do you think roller lifters last in race hours? How about Iski Bush rollers?
I guess it would depend on what kind of race. If it's bracket race, you're going a 1/4 mile a time or 1/8 mile a time, probably last indefinitely. I know some of those really high-end lifters will go, like I said, 20, 25,000 miles. So, you can kind of equate that to whatever race you're thinking about.
I think you got to definitely be thinking about circle track with that. That's what I would say with that question.
Mm-hmm.
Super Killer. Has Brent talked about his cam tunnel kit? That thing is genius. I remember seeing you work on that. Tell us about that.
So there's horsepower that you have to pay for, and then there's horsepower that's free. And things like oil pump designs can give you free horsepower. Oil windage is one of the biggest free horsepower makers that you can get. Even something as simple as putting standpipes in the lifter valley. So blocking off those oil returns with a standpipe so that the block all your combustion gases can still vent, but your standpipe is higher than your oil level in your lifter valley. Anything that you can do to keep oil off the rotating assembly is horsepower. Cam tunnels are not new. Cam tunnels have been used for decades, literally. And all of your really high-end drag race and mostly your cup engines and that sort of thing, they all use cam tunnels. Dart has blocks with integral cam tunnels built into them. So whatever you can do to keep oil off of the crank and the rods and everything is free horsepower. So the cam tunnel kit that I'm using is basically a series of formed sheet metal plates and just epoxied into place. And it makes it's actually a hemispherical design. It's not a full tunnel, but it's kind of like this. So the tunnel fills up with oil and your lifters are submerged in oil. And then the oil basically floods up into the lifter valley and then drains, away from the rotating assembly. So, we're not talking about, 100 horsepower or anything like that. I think some numbers that I've seen thrown around is 30 horsepower on a 1,000 horsepower engine. So 3%, like I said, it's not a lot. But on a 700 horsepower engine, 20 horsepower, I'll take that. There's not much work to it. But I'm getting ready to try it out as soon as I get my parts in for my tunnel port mule. We'll give the cam tunnel a go and see how everything works out.
My old engine guy who's 81, and he had a flat plane crank 350 that no one's really seen. I made a video on that, some Chevy stuff on there. But he told me a story, which I made a little short of, about another trick that Bob Glidden had. He said he went to the track and saw his engine. It had no oil to the top of the valve springs or nothing. It was all shut off. All it had was Molly lube all over all the springs, the rocker arms just coated in Molly lube. He never ran oil up to the top just for that same fact. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting.
I would venture to say that they were trying to keep oil in the bottom end. And, back in the day,
yep,
they didn't have really good connecting rods or anything like that. And, in terms of Ford FE stuff, we didn't have Molinar rods and, scat rods and that sort of thing back then. They were actually putting shim stock in between the rod and the rod cap, making the hole round. And then when you remove the shim stock and put the cap on the rod, you have a little bit of an outer round hole. So it would actually work a little bit more oil because they were spinning bearings because the rods were so flimsy. So,
okay.
That's why they were running 120 pounds of oil pressure and, or they were doing this and doing that, trying to get the engines to live. I've seen factory FE blocks with, holes literally 9/16 of an inch drilled in between the cam bearings and the main saddle because they were trying to get stuff to live. And, we're just so far past, technology now that you just don't have to do things like that. Cup engines run with the valve springs submerged in oil. They'll actually fill the valve cover plumb up with oil to keep, the valve springs cool and that sort of thing. So, like I said, my guess is he was probably trying to keep oil in the bottom end just to save the bottom end.
Rodney Harder, what do you think about Promax FE heads? I don't remember. Who is Promax? Is that Chinese
Promax
company?
they're a brand. So I don't want to ruffle any feathers, so I'll just keep my thoughts to myself.
There it is. Okay. There's another company that steals technology and produces stuff. I think it's the same company that we're talking about. Maybe they changed their name, but either
Promax is a copy. It's basically a Chinese copy of an Edelbrock head.
Okay.
And Speedmaster, ProComp, they do the same thing.
Yep.
They'll copy well-known brands such as MSD, and they just don't copy it very well. And
Right.
that's kind of like the deal with the Promax stuff.
Great information and discussion, guys. It really is. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things on this live chat. Run the gambit, that's for sure. And I'm telling you, we should about 15 more minutes, but we could do this again, Brent. There's so many questions to finish up, We're never going to get done. But thanks, guys, for being here. He's from Australia. Yanks. Well put, Brent. I have put a couple thousand street miles on my solid roller over 14 years now. 700, 800 horsepower with drags and power events also in between. Thank you. Mikey Hunts, what's going on? Brent, you spec'd my cam with 4V heads, and I have since went to Trick Flow 225. Now here's the next part of the question. Is there enough of a difference to switch cams for a hot engine? Currently make 625.
I don't know. I'd have to see the flow numbers. There again, we're basing those. So let me back up and say one thing. The more or better that the head flows, the easier the job is for the camshaft. So if you take a specific cylinder head camshaft package and then you port the cylinder heads, your horsepower peak RPM will go up when you give it a shot the next time. That's because if you think of a cam opening a valve as a door opening, the better flowing the head, the more stuff you're going to get in the door before the door closes. Okay, so it's easier to make horsepower with a better flowing head. So to answer your question, I would have to see the difference in flow numbers between the heads you had before and the heads you have now, and also that intake exhaust flow ratio to determine if the cam is right, in the split, in the duration split. So not really enough information to say yay or nay, but if you're making 625 horsepower, you're doing pretty good.
That's Michael Parsons. If you remember people's names, that's who that is.
Yep.
Michael Parsons from Texas, big state of Texas, guys.
Yep.
I mean, we have people all over: Texas, Kentucky, Michigan, Australia, everywhere. James Waller, do you have any experience with a 427 sock motor?
Little bit, not much. Getting ready to do, I think, 2. So I'll have those on my channel. Both of them are going to be Haascat motors. So, we're looking for 900,000 horsepower between both of them. So, I would say stay tuned for that, because that should be coming around the pipe probably the middle of this year.
I'll tell you this, James. My buddy that I'm going to see this week that had that 350 flat plane crank also has a cammer. It's all ready to go. And he wants to put in a 64 Galaxy. That's a popular swap. Also, I'm trying to get cams now for a cammer. They're really hard to get. I got a line on a couple now, the guy that makes them. And
I can get you some.
Can you?
Yeah.
All right, I need a couple then. But this guy's looking for a couple cams. He's trying to make 2,000 horsepower, I think, with twin turbos. So we'll talk after we get done here.
Okay.
Eric McMahon, does it matter if cams are parkerized after they've been nitrated? I'm not sure.
I don't know really what that's referring to. I don't know. I'm just not, my degree is in mechanical engineering. We had some materials classes, and I can't remember what parkerizing is or anything like that. I know that they're all surface treatments, but I don't know which one's which. So I'm probably not your guy to ask. It's not really my wheelhouse.
Now, you also talked about cryogenics. You said you only tried it once.
Mm-hmm.
What about that vibration table? I can't think of the name off the top of my head, that you bolt parts on and then it vibrates them at whatever ultrasonic vibrations to stress relieve. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think so. I know some guys do valve springs like that.
Yeah.
Stress relief valve springs. Yeah.
Any experience with that?
I've used valve springs like that. I don't know exactly if they use the table to vibrate it or not, but I've used a lot of stress relief parts like that.
Gary Thorsell, I just subscribed to your channel.
There you go.
Good. So I don't know if it's my channel or his, but you better hit both of them. Then we're all covered. Thank you, Gary. And, I see a lot of people watch your videos, but not everybody subscribes to your channel. Not that they have to, but it does help. It makes a big difference. It keeps you in that algorithm to keep your videos up there to share your information with everybody. So thank you, guys. David Reed, does Crowder make their own lifters or job them out?
No clue on that one. They make good lifters, though.
They do. They make good parts. There's no doubt about that. Thank you, Andy. You need more sports garage. It's been awesome. It has. We're kind of winding down in the next 9 minutes or so. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys being here. It's been fun talking to Brent about stuff. We may even have to do it again if you got time,
Sure, we'll make time.
All right. Tom Copa again. Around what spring pressure will you start pulling the rocker studs out of a trick flow head?
I would say closer to 700 pounds. If you're using trick flow heads, hold on, I want to show you something.
Yeah, see, I thought they would hold more than that, but.
Well, the thing is, on an FE,
what
they're 3/8 studs.
Okay.
So, and you've only got 4 of them.
Yep.
On a trick flow head, they are made thicker. The rocker stand pads are like 300 thousandths taller. You can take advantage of that because that hole is still drilled and tapped. Precision Oil Pumps makes a trick flow head rocker stud kit.
Oh, wow.
So the base thread is a lot bigger, a lot longer than a traditional stud. So I would snag you a set of those, and I wouldn't worry about. I think the springs that I sent with your package were like 600 open. You should be able to handle that, no problem.
And I'll tell you, Precision Oil Pumps, great guy, Garifro there.
Yeah,
I buy a lot of stuff from him. He sponsored me on my builds. Just a nice guy, and it's cheaper to buy oil pump from him than to spend hours and messing around with your own and grinding and deburn and doing all that. That's what I've learned from that experience.
Doug's a good guy.
He is.
I'm gonna be putting together a Boss 429 for him.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Nice. I'm gonna need one of those soon once I get this 354 out of the Mustang in a couple years. That's the next thing we're gonna do. So yeah, Joe Garifo, I think his name is, right?
Doug.
Doug Garifo.
Yep.
My mistake, Doug.
Yes.
Click the like button, please. That's what keeps us going. Definitely. Headers can be a nightmare on the dyno. They sure can.
Yep.
Definitely. You got to have your pair that you like to use for. You probably do have a couple sets that you use for your specific combos that you do. KR, 2 of my best YouTube guys all in one place. I follow you both religiously. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you being here. Both of us do. It's
Sure.
fun to be able to talk to people that get on your channel, subscribe to you, that watch your videos so they can see who you are. You know what I mean? That they're not just, Hi guys, Tim also with DragBoss Garage. You know, that's my little line I say for every video. So it's good to see how you are in a different atmosphere other than just making a video. So
Yep.
thank you guys. Craig Hansen, Rick G, Mustang Rick, 6.9 Mach 1. Brent built a set of CHI 4V heads for my 410 Cleveland build in custom grind cam. Said get a strip dom and a 2-inch super sucker. Made 610 and 527 feet. Nice. And that's what I like to see, results, you know. And not to keep putting that 354 up there, but, you know, when I put that video up there, people go crazy because you made 615 horse with just stock iron heads. Nice valve job, cleanup. There's no port work done to those ports. You can see that they're not. And that's the thing about those heads. When they were made, those heads were made to make 650 horse right out of factory.
Yeah.
But the blocks couldn't handle that RPM to get up there. You know, they just didn't think, I don't think back then, engines were going to run 7-8 grand.
Yep.
I don't know. Gary Ward, Tim, thanks for all you do. I appreciate that, Gary. And thank Brent too, because he's taking time out of here and it makes a big difference for us. So thank you so much. How much power can a 3-inch header collector support on a stroker Cleveland? Primaries are 1 7/8.
I know that I've done almost 800 horsepower with a 3-inch collector.
Oh, there you go. I made 752 with a 3.5 and 1 7/inch pipe. So Ralph Thomas, can you guys speak on the slow burn versus fast burn octane gas compared to long rod versus short rod?
Probably not in 4 minutes, but I will say I will say that a lot of guys put too much emphasis on rod length. To me, I want as short of a piston as I can get because it's light, and I just want to connect the crank to the piston. So Tim's 354 has got a 6400 rod in it. Not many guys have run a 600 or a 6400 rod, but that thing made a lot of horsepower and a lot of torque. So like I said, I think people put too much emphasis on rod length and rod length stroke rod ratios, whatever they call it. I think it's a lot less critical than what people give it credit for.
Everyone hit the like button. Thank you, Andy. We appreciate that. Cleveland's forever? Yep. In my book, they are. There's no doubt about that. It's just amazing how many people here, and I want to go through all these comments, but we just can't. I can't keep up with them all. So here's what we should do. We should really think about doing another live chat, Brent. You know, plan something and maybe do something where we can, I don't know, pick a certain topic so we don't go all over the place. Maybe just do Cleveland's, you know, on one time where we just talk about Cleveland's only and not go with FE. I think that might be a little easier. I don't know. We'll talk about it. And you guys in the comments, tell us what you want to hear about. If you want Brent to come back, put that in the comments. If you want to have a specific topic or an engine class, you know, because I'm more of a Cleveland aficionado, then we'll do that. And we'll try not to do 2 hours, but I don't know. Look how fast it went.
It went fast, yeah.
It really did. So we'll see. I appreciate it all. I'll run down through here for a minute and just give some shout outs to people that have been here that I didn't get a chance to talk to and mention. Harry, Ricky Fulks, John Elliott, it's good to see you. We appreciate that. Martin Gagney, Paul Rashley, Arthur again, Mike Caruso, it's good to see you. I don't know do you know Mike?
I do know Mike.
Yeah, he worked for Felpro one time. He'd probably be good to have on a live chat. He knows a lot of people.
He would.
Really. George, it's always good to see you here. And Julian S. was on. We answered some questions from him. And Anarchy is Freedom. Okay. I like that screen name. Tim Miller, it's good to see you. Rick Norrington. Jerry Whaley, we had talked about him before. But there's just so many people. Joe Blow, Ed's Machine. It's good to see you here. Racer D. Anthony Codovino, good to see you here. Greg, from the shred. That guy makes a living out of taking broken bolts out in Australia, out of everything, heads, cams, anything that's got a broken bolt, he can get it out of there. It's pretty interesting business. So looking at it right now, we got about 15 seconds before it's over. So we're going to end it right now. And I appreciate you guys being here, DragBoss Garage. We'll get Brent back here again. Right, Brent?
Yes, sir.
All right. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, and share.